If you're not doing well in practice right now, there are a few questions that you can ask yourself, and that's what we're going to go over in today's episode. Hey there, I'm Eli Straw, a mental performance coach who works with athletes from around the world on building a stronger mental game. Now, I talk a lot about helping athletes perform better during games, but there's also the idea of making sure that you are performing your best during practice. That's especially important if you are working for a starting position or you're just working to get more playing time. But it's also important just in general when it comes to you improving. The first question you want to ask yourself if you're not playing well during practice is, what is your goal for practice? Now, it's easy to have the goal for practice simply be, I want to have a good practice. But that may not be specific enough for you. We want to figure out what is the specific intent that we have for the day. In other words, what are we working on today? So my goal for practice needs to be aligned with what I am trying to improve. The reason that this is important is because even if you're working for a starting position or more playing time, you still have to have clear focus going into practice. So what do I mean by having a clear intent or a clear goal for practice? Well, this will involve the specific controllable parts of your game that you are wanting to work on. And this needs to be separate from what your coach will have you do during practice, depending on, what the drill is that the coach is having you do, whether or not you all are, going through certain plays, whatever it might be, but you can still have your clear intent for that day. Maybe it's working on a specific part of your technique. Maybe it's working on something mental. But when you go into practice and you set yourself a very clear, controllable goal, you've now taken your attention off of the idea of just having a good practice, and you know that you are working on something specific for that day. I would encourage you to write these goals down going into practice, so then you can remember them during practice, but also reflect on those goals after practice to check in on the progress that you made. The second question is, are you treating practices too much like games? Now, this can be a tricky one because it kind of goes both ways. We do want to be just as focused and give as much effort during practice. But I see a lot of athletes, especially when they are working for more playing time, become stressed during practice since they are treating practice like a performance. We do want to have a similar level of intent and focus and effort during practice, right? Because people say you want to practice like you play. And that is 100% true. But we don't want to get caught up in feeling like we are performing for our coaches. In all reality, we are, especially if coaches considering, who are they going to play and what's the starting lineup going to look like. But when we get too caught up in that during practice, we actually limit our own improvement because we are no longer focused on what we want to work on that day. We're just simply thinking, I have to do my best today. I have to perform well for coach. And that could be a distraction for you, and it could be something that is leading to you playing with too much anxiety during practice or playing with too much fear about making mistakes during practice, which may be leading to this underperforming during practice. I hope you're enjoying today's episode. I just wanted to take a quick break to remind you that I do offer one-on-one mental coaching for athletes. It's a 12-week program where we will have weekly coaching sessions. It begins with an assessment, and it also has a workbook that includes exercises for you to go through between our sessions. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I've put a link in the description below. Question 3 is, are you overthinking during practice? Now, I don't mean for this one to contradict the last question, but on the flip side of treating practice as too much like a performance, we can also get too analytical during practice, which then limits our athleticism. You want to have something that you're working on that day during practice, but you never want to be overthinking your mechanics. You do want to think a little bit more about your technique when you're working on drills and when you're doing specific exercises during practice, but you also have to work on being present during the drill and not overthinking what you're going to do. Because even though it's practice, when you overthink your mechanics and you overthink what you're going to do next, that can lead to this stiff style of play where you're not really playing athletically, you're not playing in the moment, you're not playing freely. Question number 4 is, are you responding to mistakes in a positive way? This one will apply to both practices and games. No matter when we are making mistakes, if we don't respond to them positively, this can snowball into more mistakes and underperforming. So during practice, really work to respond to mistakes well. Now, that doesn't mean that you are saying, I don't care if I make mistakes. But if we take a step back and we examine what is a skill that you need to develop during games in order to play better, one of the key skills is being able to move on from mistakes. You have to be able to bounce back. We know that mistakes will happen. If we get caught up overthinking and dwelling on the mistakes that we made, that will only hurt us during the game. So if you work on moving on from mistakes positively during practice, you are actually training a skill that you need during game time. So moving on from mistakes during practice can become one of your goals or one of your focuses that you have for practice, because we know that it's a mental skill that is crucial to success during competition. And then the fifth question is, how are you evaluating practices? And how are you using one practice to lead into the next practice to put you on the path toward improving? Whenever we are underperforming during practice, in a very similar way to when we underperform during games, it is easy to beat ourselves up and dwell on the fact that we played poorly or we practiced poorly. When we get too caught up in that negative thinking, we are overlooking the lessons that we can take from practice. And those lessons are really important to you playing better in the next practice. So in addition to setting goals before practice, we also want to work on evaluating practices objectively. This is where you sit down after practice, you write down what were the good things from practice today, what are things that you did well, but then you also look at, what did I not do well today? What can I work on? What can I learn? And then those become your goals for the next practice. And if we do this day in and day out, practice after practice, you will see yourself improving during practice and ultimately performing better. And the final thing that I want to mention, which isn't necessarily a question for you to ask yourself, but it's something I do think is important when we are wanting to play better during practice, is that while we want to have specific parts of our game we are working on during practice, and while we want to see practices as the place where we try new things and we work on things, we also have to keep in mind that there are moments during practice where we need to practice our game time mindset. So I said earlier in one of the questions that you don't want to treat practice as like a performance. However, if you do get to a point during practice where you all are scrimmaging or you are going through game-like scenarios, that is where we want to take more of a game time approach, because you also have to practice the ability to be present, to not overthink mechanics, to be fully in the moment, and to play freely. That's something we are practicing during those game time moments during practice. So while you don't want to think that you are performing in the sense of, I have to do perfectly and this creates anxiety, if you are at a point during practice where you all are scrimmaging or anything like that, that is where you want to practice your game time mentality. And an example of this is a soccer player that I'm working with right now who tends to try to take too many risks or try new things during scrimmages in practice. And he and I were discussing how during those scrimmages during practice, he needs to just work on being in the moment and playing freely with the skills that he does have right now, just like he does during games. And then when he's working on drills or working on his technique on his own or during other parts of practice, that's when he can work on, trying new things and working on new skills and stuff like that. But that is also a key thing to keep in mind during practice. You want to simulate a game time mindset whenever you are in a game time situation during practice. I hope these questions are helpful to you in getting you to perform better during practice, because I know especially if you're working to get more playing time or win that starting position, your practice play is almost just as important as your game time performance. Like I said earlier, if you are interested in my one-on-one coaching program, I've put a link to learn more about that in the description below. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I wish you the best of success in all that you do.